This is the Global Mom Show, episode 30. Hi, I'm Mary Grace Otis, and you're listening to the show for moms who want to live globally minded lives wherever they are and teach their kids to do the same. Welcome to the Global Mom Show. If this is your first time listening, I'm so glad that you found us. This is the third episode of season 2, and new episodes come out every other Tuesday. And you can access all the past episodes through iTunes, Stitcher, or any podcast player. Go to theglobalmom.com and you can subscribe to the show as well as subscribe to get weekly emails from me that are full of personal stories and resources and links of things I'm enjoying online. Each week on the show this season, I'm picking a special resource to feature to help you in your quest to live more global lives and raise global kids. This week, my featured resource is actually an Instagram account and website from Stephanie Langford. She is an entrepreneur with a family of 7, and she's currently planning a 3-month trip to Central America with her whole family. I think her youngest one is 19 or 20 months right now. She's giving some step-by-step guidance on her site and photos on her Instagram about how she plans, what gear she's using, how she packs, and other great tips. And I'm sharing this today for my friend Rebecca because Rebecca is planning a trip to France next year with all 4 of her girls, and she's a little bit worried about how to pack and how to organize. So, Rebecca, here is who you should follow to get the nitty-gritty details. One thing I love that Stephanie shares is specifically which type of backpack is best for each of her kids and their different ages and sizes. They have the philosophy that each child should carry his or her own pack the whole time. They don't do additional bags, which makes things easy. We've done that when we've done some air travel, and it's great. It's awesome for everyone to be able to carry their own stuff, and you don't have to deal with lots of luggage. So go check out entrefamily.com. That's entrefamily.com, or on Instagram, entresteph. That's entresteph, and you'll find lots of tips for trip planning and packing and everything you need to know for your next big trip. Now let's dive into today's episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Global Mom Show today. I'm so excited to welcome a new friend of mine, Anjelica Malone, and she and I are going to be chatting about so many fun things today. You can find her over at anjelicamalone.com. She is a wife, a mom of 2 little girls. She is an entrepreneur. She has her own shop. She is also a lactation consultant. She's a third culture kid. She's lived all over the world. She's ex-military. She's got such an interesting background, and we're going to talk about a lot of those things today, and it's going to be a lot of fun. And so you guys just stick around. Anjelica, welcome to the show.
Hi, Mary Grace. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Why don't we get started by having you just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your family and your background.
Absolutely. So my name is Anjelica Malone. That's Anjelica with a J. Everyone always gets that confused with Anjelica with a G. I've always had to say that, and when I was a kid, I used to get made fun of from, like, Angelica from the Rugrats. I don't know if you've ever heard of that show. That's super old. But
That's probably not as old as me, so it wasn't as old when I was a kid. So anyway.
So yes, my name's Anjelica. I live here on Guam with my husband. My husband is in the U.S. Coast Guard, and we've been married for almost 10 years. We have 2 girls, one born here on Guam, and the other, my older one, she was born in Puerto Rico. And so they are third culture kids. And for those who, don't know, third culture is just a child who's growing up in a culture outside of their parents' culture. And I was also a third culture kid growing up. My parents were both in the Navy. And from the time I was born until I graduated high school, my parents were in the military. And then I joined the military myself. So I lived all over. I was born in Southern California, and just a few months after I was born, my family moved to Guam, and I lived here at the same age pretty much as my 2 girls are living here on Guam right now. So this is where I kind of got my start living the global life. Guam is a U.S. territory, but it definitely has its own distinct culture. And then I moved to a few places in the United States, New Orleans, Philadelphia. I also lived in New Jersey for a little bit. And then we moved to Japan. So that was my second overseas experience. I lived in Japan for a few years as a kid, and I used to take Japanese classes living there. I went to a DoD school I love DoD schools. I feel like they are very enriching, and the environment is really great for kids, especially for new kids who are coming in. It wasn't the same. I didn't always have that experience whenever I lived in the United States because a lot of the time the kids in those schools were used to each other. They had grown up with one another. But at DoD schools overseas, the kids were all used to new students coming in. They were used to everyone being very different. And so I really loved my. Go
Tell
ahead.
us what DoD stands for.
DoD stands for Department of Defense. And so it usually encompasses military children, so whose parents are in the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, the Coast Guard, all of those services, and then also NATO children or government workers. So I later on, after Japan, lived in Tennessee for a little bit. I lived in a suburb outside of Memphis, and then I went to school in Italy, in Naples, Italy, and that's actually where I went through the majority of ninth grade all the way until graduation. And that was another DoD school. And it was very diverse. There were kids from Romania and Poland, Italian students, American students, Puerto Rican students, everywhere. If you could think of it, they came from there, the Philippines, Japan. And so it was very diverse and multicultural. And that was my context on life for a very long time. I never really felt different when I was around those kids. We just always kind of accepted one another for who they were. And that has definitely shaped who I became. I never really had an identity within distinctly my race, I guess. I didn't know what was expected of me as, say, a Black American woman. I just kind of knew what my context was as a military child or a child in what I come to now know as a third culture kid life. But I loved it. I really loved growing up that way. My husband actually was a military child as well, but he didn't have that same experience. He grew up his entire time in the US. So though he traveled from place to place, it was always within the US and usually in the South. And the schools, like I kind of mentioned before, were used to students having all grown up together. And so it was very difficult for him to move all the time. And so we talk about that a lot now that we're raising our two girls and we're moving a bit with the military and we're going to be moving again soon. He would really like to settle down, and I'd like to settle down as well, but I guess whenever I think about travel, I think of it as a positive thing. I remember all the really wonderful learning experiences I had. And so I have really good feelings when I travel, and I really want that for my girls. Mm-hmm. So that's a bit about me.
Okay. And where did you, yeah, that's great. Where did you meet your husband actually?
So at 17, I joined the Coast Guard, and I was trained as a health services technician or a corpsman. So I did emergency medicine, and like I worked in a family practice clinic doing like nursing and medical assisting. And about 3 years in or 4 years in, I was stationed on a U.S. Coast Guard cutter that did like counter drug operations. So it was a larger boat, and my husband was stationed on that boat as well. And one day we had pulled into a port. And I remember I was already off on what's called Liberty, which means like you've been allowed to leave and you can go off and do whatever you want to do. But I ran across my chief and he said to me, we had this guy, he hurt his head on the boat and he had to get sutures. So I did sutures, but he'll be back in a couple days and you'll need to take his sutures out. And so I think maybe before he needed his sutures out, I saw him in the passageway and I was like, oh my gosh. And I was not looking for anyone. That's definitely not what you're supposed to be doing when you're stationed together on a boat. But I remember seeing him and I actually knew that, like, I don't know what it was. I knew that he would be my husband. But anyway, he ended up being the guy who came in to get his sutures removed. And so I took out his sutures and we ended up having mutual friends like that. Nothing happened there, but we ended up having mutual friends who would throw parties at their house and get togethers. And we just kind of began to hang out more and more with each other and got to know each other. And he wouldn't let me be. He just always wanted to be around and he'd always make himself available. And so it just kind of went from there. And we come from very different backgrounds. So we both have military upbringings. I think that definitely helped us to connect. We have very different upbringings. He definitely is a Southern kid. He grew up a lot of his life in Texas and stuff, but it's worked. It's working.
Well, good. Well, tell us what you're doing over on Guam. Tell us what it's like there, what the scenery is like for all of us who haven't been there. Tell us what you love about it.
Okay, so I love Guam. Before we lived on Guam, we were living in Puerto Rico, and I loved Puerto Rico. And so when we needed to leave, I told my husband I wanted to go to another island. So it was between here and Hawaii, and we got Guam. We were this is where we were told we were living. And I was excited. I got here and it looks very different than Puerto Rico, but some of the things I love are the beaches. The beaches are beautiful here. So I know kind of in the States, typically when you go to a beach, there's like a boardwalk or something along the beach typically as well. It's not like that here. It's pretty much as you're driving down the road, you can see the beach along usually the left or right side of the road, depending on which way direction you're going. And it just follows because the island is pretty narrow. It's more long. And so when you're driving up, you can see the beach all along the side of the road. And really, if you just pull off on the side of the road, you are against the beach. You're there. Sometimes they'll have parking spaces there. Sometimes it'll just be a wall. And it's very shallow for, a mile or two out. So kids can play along the shores of Guam, pretty much all the way around the island. On one side there is more of a cliff, but on the main side that everyone kind of frequents, it's very shallow. And so kids can play in the water. It's only like a foot or two deep. Maybe it goes about 4 feet deep. And the water is clear, very clear. You can see there's a lot of fish. And then there's a very thick portion of reef that then after that mile or two that surrounds the island of Guam. And then if you know the kind of the location of Guam, there's the Marianas Trench very, very close by. And so it drops off and gets very, very deep after that. And so there's a lot of deep sea fishing. There's a lot of reef fishing as well. So people do a lot of fishing here. Tuna is very popular. It's delicious. So one of the really popular dishes here on Guam is called poke. And so it's just raw tuna that's been marinated with soy sauce and spices, sesame seeds, and you eat it over what they call like sushi rice. So it's a sticky rice with maybe some kind of vinegar or something on it. It's really, really good. It's a very popular dish.
That sounds good.
And the people of Guam are called Chamorro, and they speak Chamorro language as well.
And what's the population of locals versus expats there? Because I know there's a large military community there.
There's a huge military community here, and I think that the military community makes up about almost 10% of the population here on Guam. There's a very large naval base down south, or I guess more south, and then up north there's a large Air Force base. But there isn't a huge mingling between the military and the local community. That's actually something I wanted to change more of when I got here, or I wanted to make an effort to be a part of the community here on Guam. That was something I was intentional about in Puerto Rico, and I definitely wanted to do that here. And it's just, I think, a mixture of things. But one of the things I noticed in Puerto Rico that I think is possibly the case here is that a lot of the military spouses, this is their first quote unquote overseas experience, though Guam is a U.S. territory. And so this may be their first time being an other or a minority, and it can be a little intimidating to try and get out into the culture and the community when you don't understand it and you don't really know your place or how you will be accepted. But what I'll say is that the local people are amazing. They're so kind, so friendly. There are people who don't have positive feelings about the military, but on a person-to-person basis, they're very accepting of everyone as long as you are kind and respectful as well. I have never had a negative experience because my husband was in the military. The majority of my lactation clients are all locals, and they've invited me into their home and into their room after birth, and it's never been something that came up in a negative way.
Mm-hmm. Okay, since you brought up the lactation, tell me a little bit about that and your interest in that and how that started and what you're doing with that right now.
Yeah, so I am a CLEC, which is a certified or certificated lactation educator counselor. And so I do lactation classes, breastfeeding classes, and I do one-on-one home consultations. I also do like editorials and curriculum writing and stuff like that on the side. But my main business here on Guam is to educate families about breastfeeding and how they can incorporate that into their life and instead of allowing breastfeeding to take over their life. And then I do home visits. And so my goal when I got here was just to kind of jump into where the work was already being done within the lactation field. But I quickly saw that there was, a missing link, and that was these private visits. So a lot of the women here are private and don't want to expose themselves, like at a breastfeeding social, something that might be really popular in the States, are these get-togethers with moms where you kind of all breastfeed in public together or you breastfeed in this group space. But that is not as popular with the moms that I've seen here on Guam, the local moms. And so I began to realize that that created a barrier to support for the moms. So they wouldn't come out to the available socials because that really wasn't where they felt most comfortable. And the socials aren't extremely diverse. And so there's a lot of American moms at the current socials, and there wasn't a lot of local culture infused in that. And as I got to meet moms more, I realized that that did play a big part in the way that they breastfed and how they navigated breastfeeding. And so during my home visits, typically I like to meet all my moms before they give birth. So I try some, like that was the point of actually how I launched my Instagram account, was just trying to meet moms. And so I meet them hopefully before they give birth. If not, then I come in afterward and I go to their house and we sit down for 1 to 2 hours. And we mainly are chatting about what their situation is like, what their family dynamic is like, their past history with breastfeeding, what their breastfeeding goals are. And then I create a plan on how to help them implement that. We also will address if they're having any pain, how to get the baby latched on. If the baby's on formula, which is very popular because some hospitals here don't support the breastfeeding mother. The policies are just in place that the baby is taken away soon after birth, and then the baby's given formula. And if the mom doesn't want formula, she would have to have really advocated for herself in the moment. And that's very difficult, depending on what kind of birth outcome you have. And so a lot of moms are trying to wean off of formula when I see them. And so I do that. And yeah, that's my job here.
Did you do that in Puerto Rico as well?
So that's actually where it all started. In Puerto Rico is where I gave birth to my first daughter. I wasn't planning on having children anytime soon. I didn't even know if I was going to become a mom for many years. I was pursuing a career. But when we moved to Puerto Rico, there was a lot of things that happened. And we got to a point, my husband and I, where we realized we did want to have children. And so we had my first daughter, and breastfeeding went really well. Except there was like a time where she just stopped latching on completely, where she had been gaining weight. It was probably about 6 to 8 weeks in. She had been gaining weight really well. She was healthy and everything, but then all of a sudden she just wouldn't latch, and we didn't know what was going on. We tried everything, and we called our doula, and our doula offered support, but that wasn't really her primary focus, lactation. She was more for the birth world. And so she gave the advice that she could, but again, that wasn't what we needed. And then she referred us to a midwife friend of hers, and there's a little bit of a language barrier there. English wasn't her primary language or her first language. And so she was trying to give us support over the phone, which made it even more difficult. And so we still ended up needing help, and we went to our pediatrician. And again, we had this language barrier problem where he did speak English, and he cared a lot about breastfeeding and supported us, but we really needed someone who was going to be there with us at home to observe a feeding, to give us then recommendations in our own language and in a language that they felt most comfortable talking in, because, breastfeeding is very nuanced. And we eventually got back on track and were able to get her, exclusively breastfeeding without any problems. We never had to go to formula. But after that experience, I realized, as someone who's grown up living in different countries, and I love travel, and I would even love it if maybe one day my husband and I were able to retire overseas, it would be very likely I could end up in this situation with another mom who is English speaking, but we're living in a country where, a lot of the support is not in English, or she needs one-on-one help. And so I wanted to get training to become a lactation specialist. I wanted to be able to help moms in this very same situation. And so I searched, and I found a training through UC San Diego. And when my daughter was about 9 months old, I attended that training, and it was about a 3-month long course. And I became a lactation educator counselor after that. And I began just kind of offering advice and support to the local women and the military families. But when I got here on Guam is where I really started my practice. I got my business license and all of that.
Okay, cool. And so tell us about, now you've written a book about breastfeeding, and tell us about that.
Yeah. So my philosophy on breastfeeding is like this. I believe in helping women achieve the feeding relationship that's best for them. I think partly my situation being a military family, we needed English speaking help. We lived in a more rural area of Puerto Rico. So I gave birth in the capital of San Juan, but we lived in another town 2 hours away. And so there was not a lot of support no matter what you ran into over there. And so I realized that moms need individualized help. It's, that was our situation, but there are moms who may need to return back to work soon after giving birth, or there are moms who, once they do return to work, are going to be traveling overseas a lot. I just realized there was a lot of nuance within motherhood. I call motherhood like a mosaic. Everyone's motherhood can look very, very different. And if we really want to raise breastfeeding rates and the long-term goal of having women breastfeed for longer, we have to address the individual needs of moms, and especially the modern mom, which can be very different than when we kind of set up a lot of these goals for breastfeeding. And it's quickly changing. Like the issues that we were facing with, helping moms breastfeed 6 or 7 years ago are not always the same. Like we need to have relevant care. And so that's actually the premise of my book, Milk Boss. So it's called Milk Boss 101, and it's a modern guide to helping women breastfeed like a boss through love, education, and empowerment. I think that today moms want that before they want to know that you actually care before you start giving them all these recommendations. And then they also want you to give them give them education that allows them to choose what's best for them. They don't need you to tell them what to do. No matter how right you might think you are as a professional, moms today are very capable, and they feel empowered and they feel powerful. And so they're looking for someone to come alongside them and reinforce that, give them education and reinforce the fact that that they are smart beings. And so that's the whole philosophy around Milk Boss, is how do women curate this tribe around them that would honor all of that. So it extends from her workplace to her family and friends, her partner, her place of birth. It just gives a detailed plan of how to make all of that happen for you, no matter where you live, what it is that you're doing, how you can really have success with breastfeeding by creating this tribe of support around you.
And do you do long distance consultations as well, like over the internet or something like that?
So I haven't started that yet. Right now, I have an offering where a woman who is already successfully breastfeeding, who's maybe around like 4 or 5 months, has been doing it really well, is looking for someone to consult with while she goes and does maybe a trip abroad. She's wondering how to prepare or plan. I offer something like that, but I don't offer the type of consulting for like initially after birth. I think that it's really important that person be there with you. And I also don't think that I could fully commit to something like that right now. So that's what I offer.
Okay. Now, you mentioned the word collecting a tribe around you, and you have created a global tribe of women that you are also interviewing people and sending out newsletters and gathering people together on your own website. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I came up a while ago with this hashtag, just hashtag a global tribe of women. And it's based on this philosophy that I believe that we're, as women especially, are way more alike than we are different. And we have a lot of the same concerns and goals and issues in life. And I want to bring us together in hopes of building each other up and building that global community, as opposed to looking at our differences as a problem or a reason to cause division. And so on my website, I do interviews each month with different women from around the world. So I did an interview with a woman in Uganda, who's running, it's called Hope for Women in Crisis. And she works with young mothers who have become pregnant through some circumstance and now has them in a situation of needing support and maybe being left out by their family. And I did an interview most recently with a woman from Bali. She runs something called Authentic Trekking Bali. And her goal is to give people an authentic look at Bali. So one of my favorite places in the world is Bali. But something I saw when I went there was that there was a lot of emphasis on the things that were not authentically Bali. There was nothing wrong with that. I think it was wonderful. I think when you travel anywhere, tourism many times caters to what they think the tourists want. But I think it's also important to see the real lives of the people that live there, to see the history behind a place. And so that was what that business does. So her name is Ayu, and she does that. I did an interview with a doula in LA. I did a few interviews. So just the emphasis is to see just what motherhood and women are doing all around the world. So my focus is on mamas, makers or business owners, wanderlusters, and world changers. And so that's what you'll see when you read these interviews, is just this global look at those kind of women.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's really what kind of connected us in the first place, because we both have this desire just to bring together women from all different walks of life and different areas of the world and hear their perspectives and share them and understand them, because it's so important that we build these connections instead of building division among us. And I think that's really
Absolutely.
exciting to someone who has lived overseas and has, traveled and things like that. You feel like you're missing that when you don't have it. And so to get
Yeah.
to learn from other people and share and do interviews and listen, it's really refreshing to your
Yes.
spirit and to your mind, and to
Yes.
be thinking and sharing and all these things. So that's kind of, I think, what first connected us, because we both have these really similar ideas of what we want to be learning about and doing and connecting
Yeah.
women. So I did want to ask you a little bit about your shop on your website, because you've also done some work with curating some products there and connecting with women that are makers of these products. So tell us about how you found those products and those women, and how you decided on what to put in your shop.
Okay, absolutely. So my shop is based on a few principles or philosophies. So fair trade, or fair trade labor conditions, are the work environment that these products are made in. That they promote globalism, or they promote a culture, that they are made or run by a female, and that they are sustainable or vintage. And so that's what I look for when I go to curate things. And some things have been curated on location, and some things have been curated by finding the artisans online somehow. And then some have been designed by me. So I curate beads from different areas of the world, and then I turn them into bracelets and things like that. I designed a line of bags, tote bags. I've just been sketching and designing clothes and bags since I was very young. And around the time that I got active on Instagram, I saw that there were bag makers, or people making bags in different areas of the world. And I thought, wow, I wonder if I can have one of my designs actually made. And I would love for it to incorporate culture and diversity in some way. And so I found someone, and I said, hey, I'm looking for an artisan who can make a bag. Do you know of someone? And so along the way, we found this artisan that could make it, and he goes to the village and goes to the market and finds what are called weeples. So he's in Guatemala, and he finds weeples, which are traditional Mayan tops, and he repurposes them into these designs that I've made. And that was about a year ago that we did that, and that provides work for him, and it helps him to further his business. And because I'm selling them here on Guam, or to women here in America, he gets a little bit higher of a wage than he would if he were to sell his bag designs there in Guatemala. And so that is that. I thought it was really interesting too, when we first started working together and I needed to pay him, I was told I needed to pay him through Western Union. And if you've ever watched a commercial or seen these ads, they're like, don't ever send money through Western Union. But I really wanted to see if this bag design could come to life. I knew that it was a risk, and I took the risk, but it was because he doesn't have a bank account even. And the only way that he can get money sent directly to a bank account is to have this other villager take the money for him. And the villager takes a $35 cut from, each payment that he gets. And so it's really not that great for him. And so that was really interesting to see that, wow, this really does, these purchases that I'm making are making a big difference in his life. For him to get hundreds of dollars at one time and nobody takes anything from it, that's a big deal for him. And so that's how
Did you actually go to Guatemala?
No, I have not.
Okay.
And we're at the stage now where I realize, to continue on making them, I do think I need to go to Guatemala. They've had a lot of changes within their mail service. And I think to continue it on and for it to actually be a sustainable thing, I would need to go to Guatemala next and kind of work it out, the details for that. But I curate kanthas. So kantha quilts are these traditional Indian blankets where they take saris, vintage saris that have been worn, and they layer them all together. They patch any holes in them with additional material, and then they layer them together, and they do this running stitch throughout it called the kantha. And it's really, really beautiful. So I curate those from an artisan I found on the internet. She runs this business. She provides work for women living in the slums there in India. And so we sell those in the shop.
I love
There's
those.
just do you?
Yes, I
They're
do.
my
Well, they just remind me of India, so there's beautiful.
Yeah, but I would like to eventually get to the point where for all the artisans that I purchase from, I visit them on location. I don't need it to be a huge thing. I would be okay with only, working with a handful of artisans, 10 or 12 artisans, but it being a long-term sustainable thing where I actually know them as a person. They know my name, they know my children's names, I know their family. I really want it to be a personable thing, just like the interviews. Every interview I do, though they are written on the blog, I've met each one of them through like a video chat first because I want us to really get to know each other. And I feel the very same way about the pieces of my shop. I would like it to be something where when I go to share it with a customer, I can tell them, all these tiny stories, and it would really be something that connects and resonates with them. And it's not just another meaningless purchase.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I really like your bags. I think they're great. They're really cool. It's neat that you designed those. So you mentioned a little earlier about that motherhood is a mosaic and, everyone brings something different to it. And we've talked a little bit before about how you have some different mothering practices and ideas than your parents had, and you're parenting your children a little bit differently. Tell us about some of those mothering philosophies that you have and some of the things that you want to communicate to other women to empower them to just be their own person and choose how they're going to parent according to their values. Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay. Like I mentioned earlier, I didn't think I wanted to be a mother for a long time. And that was just the way that I had seen motherhood done. I saw it, it just didn't seem like what I was wanting for my life. And so I was really kind of nervous about it. And then we moved to Puerto Rico, and I have a friend, her name is Shannon, and I tell her this all the time. And I think she thinks I'm lying when I say this, but she really made all the difference for me when it came to deciding to be a mother. The way that she just lives her life, and I know her life isn't perfect. No one's life is perfect. And that was also a good thing as well. Like I didn't just see the glamorous parts of her life. I got to really see what it was like for her to be a mother. And I just saw her living and doing it her own way, even if the others were judging her or, it didn't seem conventional. Her children didn't have their shoes on, or, they were drinking just juice and she made the juice. And then there was like fruits and stuff left out. There was not the focus. She did not focus on the things that I always thought that mothers needed to focus on. And the things she did seem to focus on had this air of freedom to it that made me realize like motherhood can be whatever I want it to be. And then I began to meet other people the same way in Puerto Rico. There was another lady that I went to church with. Her name was Elka, and her and her husband live in this tiny house on this, plot of land. And they just kind of, they do what it is that they feel is right, what they feel like, is their way of living. They don't worry if it's not conventional. They don't worry if it doesn't seem, nice enough or to a high enough standard. They were really comfortable with being themselves. And so that really made a big difference to me. And so when my husband and I got pregnant with my first daughter, I had another realization. I got pregnant right after this other girl that I was living around, and I saw her just stay very active during her pregnancy. She ran a half marathon. She just did not let pregnancy stop her. And I thought, whoa, I didn't know that that's how pregnancy could be. I really thought that when you got pregnant, you just kind of let everything go and you didn't keep up with, your health always, or your eating, and you didn't, stay current with your friends. And I didn't see that. I realized like there was this really different way of living and being a mother that made me more excited to be a mom. And as I, gave birth to my daughter and I began to meet some other moms, and then I moved here on Guam especially, and I was kind of brought back to that American experience. I lived in a rural part of Puerto Rico where it was mainly Puerto Rican people or expats who really embed themselves in the Puerto Rican culture. And then when I came here, I live on a military base and I was surrounded by much more American moms. And I saw that motherhood that scared me before, that made me not want to be a mom. And I saw that women were kind of going along with what they thought was best and the trends and living up to what other people thought they should be and doing the things like, that seemed more mainstream. But I saw that they didn't seem happy.
What are some of those things?
So like keeping your house always clean. Your kids are always wearing nice clothing. They look up to date. They're wearing, shoes that look up to date. Your car is clean. Just a lot of tiny things. Like there was never like you couldn't just go around and not have a purpose for the day. That was something I saw in Puerto Rico, but I began to see here like you always had to have a purpose. You always had to be doing something to show that you were not just really enjoying your life. And I thought, wow, I don't want to be like that again. And that's okay if that's your goal and that's your personality and that's what you want to do. But to really make the life that you want based on your own convictions and your own, values, not based on what you may feel pressured by others to do. And so I really felt like I needed to vocalize that when I began to see, like, some people would ask me like, oh, you just seem like to just be hanging out. You don't seem, I guess I was this like, I think some people may have noticed my philosophy. And so I felt like I should kind of share my philosophy. Like, I just try and do what feels most natural. And I can say it's not easy. I do easily get sucked, especially when I'm looking on Instagram or something. I get sucked into wanting my kids to, have the latest clothes or, wanting to look fashionable, all the time or put together and putting a focus on things that are not actually important to me. I think if that's something you feel very passionate about, that's something you love, then it's not something that kind of trips you up. But for me, those are things that don't come naturally to me and are not goals that I'm seeking out. And so when I feel that pressure, I realize, I've got to get back to just living the way that I want to. I want to spend days just hanging out at the beach with my girls. I want to spend time, not worrying about the current trends, not worrying about what's popular on the internet or on Instagram or what, people are saying on Facebook. I just want to be okay with, only knowing what's going on with my family or my friends at times. And so that's kind of the philosophy. It's just to allow mothers to embrace their motherhood in their own way.
I'm really curious about how this plays out I'm just thinking here about, the fact that you're a third culture kid and living in a different country or different community. You said it was almost easier in Puerto Rico even than it is now on the military base. And I'm just curious about how that would be like when you do move back to the States, like if it's going to be even more difficult, because I feel like I get sucked in. Like I start worrying about things that I didn't care about. Like when I lived in India, I did not care if I had matching hand towels or if my couch was reupholstered or something like that. And now I look around and I see everything in my house that needs to be done, that needs to be updated, that needs to be matching. I get frustrated when things are not, organized and orderly. Now, all of that is fine. I mean, I think you should teach your kids to have some semblance of order and cleanliness and hygiene, all of that. I'm not saying, just completely drop the ball on everything, although sometimes I feel like I do, but just this whole idea that like, it doesn't matter if the pillowcase matches the bedspread. That's not crucial. And in most of the world, that's not something that I need to be stressing about, worrying about, thinking about. I don't need to go to have a perfect house. And yet that takes up so much of a lot of people's time. And some people just enjoy that. They want that. Yeah. They like that, creating that beautiful atmosphere and things. But I guess I'm just kind of thinking here right now. That's why I'm stuttering so much. But part of this whole benefit of living in a different culture than the one where you were raised is the fact that you can step outside of it easier. Because when you're in your own culture and surrounded by people and things that you think you're supposed to do and things that you like, it's little things for me. Like at Christmas, everyone is supposed to get Christmas pictures and Christmas cards and have matching pajamas.
Yes,
and I'm
Mary
like,
Grace.
we can't afford to go out and buy matching Christmas pajamas for everybody this year, so we're not having it. And I felt disappointed about that. And I was like, this is ridiculous. My kids have pajamas. Just because they're not red and green, why am I making this? Like, why do I feel like I'm somehow not doing this right or something like? And that's a stupid example because that's really
that's really
not important. But I mean, it's just It's things like that. And it's things like saying, our kid is not going to be in all the sports because he's 5 or he's 6. And so we're just going to hang out with our family and we're not going to do all this stuff. And feeling like you're not, like you don't, like trying not to get sucked in.
Yes.
And I think when you live in a different culture, you can sometimes do that easier because you're already different. You're already weird and you're already out of it. And also a lot of the cultures that are not the United States have a more collectivist mentality that values relationships more than achievements, which I would tend to say that America values achievements a lot of times more than relationships. And so there is a little bit of freedom not to do all those things. Now, I mean,
no, I would agree.
I think for someone living in, let's say someone living in India or someone living in, someplace in Europe or someone living in a different country, they may feel those constraints because they have their own culture and they have different achievements that they have to achieve to get the approval, the status of family and friends. And so it may be even more difficult for them to break out of it. But me, there is a sense of privilege that I take with me when I go somewhere new that I don't have to fit into that culture.
100%. Yes. I think that is where it stems from for me, is that I recognized that when I had lived in this third cultural life growing up. I moved back to the States for a few years because I was in the military and I was being stationed there. And then my husband and I were stationed in Puerto Rico. And that was where I kind of felt like I went back to my third cultural roots again. And I felt comfortable. And that's where I felt like that freedom again. I felt like that freedom to be myself. There was no standard of what I had to be like. And that's where I felt that freedom to then become a mother, because I, again, was back in my own environment, which was actually being an other, being someone on the outside and being different. But it was completely okay because no one had a certain standard for me. They didn't have a role that I needed to fulfill. And now that I'm here, I'm back again, I guess, in the American type society where I feel those pressures again. So I would agree. Like, I think it is easier sometimes to just be different or not conform when you are already different. And I do wonder how I will do that when I get back to the States and we're going to Seattle. I think I have a fear a little bit, maybe not a fear. I have a concern of how that will play out. I've never lived on the West Coast, so I don't know much about it, and I don't know about a lot about the culture. But I can say, just being back in America, and it's a wealthy area, and it's very a stylish area. I do have concerns, and I do wonder how I will navigate it and what it will be like. And I think my husband even is like, I don't really understand what you're saying. I'm excited. I think it's going to be great. We're going to have access to Trader Joe's and things like that. And I will say those things do excite me, but almost in a way, I think, do I want to be excited by those things? Do I want to be so excited about that kind of stuff that becomes my focus? Because I realize that those kind of things wane. The excitement around those things don't always last. I'm sure in a year and a half, when Trader Joe's doesn't have the type of jerky that we want or something, we'll be like, oh, this Trader Joe's is not that great. We need to go, and I realized that I almost like being in a state of not always content, and it's okay, but I will have to navigate that.
I think that until you leave the U.S. and come back, you don't necessarily understand the hold that consumerism and materialism has on the U.S. culture and on everything and everywhere that you're living and thinking. I mean, we almost can't go a single day without buying something or without going to the store.
Yeah.
And that drives me bonkers. And yet it's how we're living. And it's bizarre. And, I think the whole materialism thing is so strong in our culture that it starts to just, infiltrate, like you said, like what you feel like, how you feel like you should be dressing your kids and what you feel like they should have. It's like my kids should have different shoes for every single occasion that they need to go to. No, they really just need one pair. Maybe a pair of sandals and a pair of, nicer shoes or tennis shoes or something like that, but they don't have to have like 10 pairs of shoes. And if I am aware of people in poverty, then it becomes even more aware of my excess.
The
fact that I don't need all that. So, okay, well, we are going to close this conversation down because we have already talked for like 40 minutes. And so there's so much more. And we are just going to, everybody, you're just going to have to listen again next week because we're just going to do another bonus episode. And Anjelica and I are just going to keep on talking. And so you'll just have to catch up next week. But Anjelica, I want to thank you for coming on the show today and tell everyone where they can find you online.
You can find me at AnjelicaMalone.com. You can check out my blog each week. There's a new article posting each week. And then you could also find me on Instagram. It's at Anjelica Malone, and that's Anjelica with a J like juice.
Okay. Great. Well, thanks a lot. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.
I hope you moms enjoyed that episode. I know I just love chatting with Anjelica about all things global. Like I said, she and I just kept on talking for about another hour, and I've divided that up into some bonus episodes for you that will be coming out over the next couple of weeks. I wanted to remind you of a couple of things before we go. Last week, I spoke with Lucretia Berry of Brownicity all about race and talking to your kids in a really natural way about skin color. If you would like to learn more about that, I'm working on a workshop that will be for parents about how to talk to kids in depth about race and racism. To get more info on that, you can go to theglobalmom.com/race workshop and you can sign up and I'll keep you in the loop. Signing up does not commit you to anything. It just shows me if there's some interest, and then I will know who to contact when we get the workshop completed. If you enjoyed that episode, please share it with your friends. It's been one of the most well-received episodes that I've done. There's been a lot of feedback on it and a lot of interest in it. And if you haven't listened, go back and listen to that at theglobalmom.com. And if you haven't subscribed to the show in iTunes, go ahead and do that now. And that way you will get the bonus episodes of me and Anjelica talking when those pop up. Because I'm not sure exactly when I'm going to get those edited, but it'll be in the next couple of days. Thanks so much for listening today. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to catching up with you online. The Global Mom Show is sponsored by Around the World Stories. These audio stories capture the adventures of kids from around the world and will introduce your kids to different countries and cultures as they travel with the characters to new parts of the world. Each story is about 25 to 30 minutes long, and right now the authors are traveling around Europe with their children, gathering information to write more stories. They take place in Denmark, Ireland, the Czech Republic, Germany, Austria, the Netherlands, and Spain, and they're doing a new story each week. You can get a story a week for $9.95 a month, or you can get a membership for a year's worth of weekly stories for $99. Download the stories and take them in the car or play them at home or from your phone. This is a great and easy way to introduce your children to other cultures. Head to theglobalmom.com/stories to give them a try. That's Around the World Stories. You can find me on Twitter at The Global Mom, on Facebook and Instagram at The Global Mom Show, and you can get weekly updates from me by texting Global Mom to 444-999. And I almost forgot to mention that when you subscribe to my newsletter, I'll send you my 10 simple tips for making your home more global. Thanks for listening today. Have a great week. And remember, you can live a global life wherever you are and teach your kids to do the same.